In 1999, Milton Friedman made a prediction that sounds eerily specific. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. Bitcoin launched 10 years later. Friedman died 3 years before that happened. So did he predict Bitcoin? Not exactly. But that's what makes this interesting. Friedman wasn't prophesying a specific technology. He was analyzing the structural features any private digital money would need to succeed, and more importantly, the mechanisms that would determine whether it could actually function as money rather than just a speculative asset. He identified 9 warnings, not about blockchain or proof of work or Satoshi's whitepaper, about the economic realities any alternative currency faces, regardless of the technology behind it. Some of these warnings Bitcoin has validated, others it's still colliding with. All of them reveal whether you're evaluating crypto through mechanisms or through marketing. Let's run through what Friedman actually said and what it means for Bitcoin today. Here's the full context of that 1999 interview. Friedman was asked about the future of the internet and government. He responded by identifying the functional gap that technology could fill. Anonymous, low-cost, cross-border transactions outside state monitoring. He wasn't celebrating this development ideologically. He was observing a market demand and predicting someone would meet it. His framework was simple. If there's friction in the current system, transaction costs, surveillance, capital controls, entrepreneurs will find ways around it. The key phrase, a reliable e-cash. Not just digital. Reliable, meaning people would have to trust it enough to use it for actual transactions, not just hold it hoping for appreciation. Friedman's career was built on analyzing what makes money function. 3 core properties: medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. For someone to succeed as money, not just as a collectible or speculative bet, it has to perform all 3 roles simultaneously. That's where the warnings come in. Because Friedman also spent decades studying why alternative currencies fail, why government monopolies persist, and why theoretical improvements often collapse under real-world constraints. He didn't need to see Bitcoin's code. He'd already analyzed the mechanisms that any private money, digital or otherwise, would confront. So let's go through them one by one, not as abstract theory, as specific, testable predictions about what happens when you try to create money outside the existing system. Friedman's first structural insight: if your money supply is fixed and demand for increases, the value of each unit rises. That's deflation. Bitcoin supply cap, 21 million coins, algorithmically enforced, is marketed as a feature. Sound money, can't be inflated away. But here's the mechanism Friedman would point to. If people expect a currency to appreciate, they delay spending. Why buy something today with Bitcoin if that Bitcoin will be worth more tomorrow? This is the velocity problem. Money's usefulness depends on circulation. If everyone's incentivized to hoard, you don't have a medium of exchange. You have a collectible. Friedman watched this happen with gold standard deflations. When the money supply couldn't expand with economic growth, prices fell, debts became harder to repay, spending collapsed. The economy contracted not because of productivity failure, but because of monetary strangulation. Bitcoin maximalists will argue. That's exactly the point. Fiat encourages consumption. Bitcoin rewards saving. Friedman's response would be, fine, but then it's not money. It's an investment vehicle. Money that's hoarded isn't performing money's function. It's performing the function of an asset you hope appreciates. The evidence. Transaction volume in Bitcoin is dominated by speculation, not commerce. People buy Bitcoin expecting it to rise. They don't price goods in Bitcoin. Merchants who accept Bitcoin immediately convert to dollars. That's not a currency. That's a bet on future scarcity value. Friedman's warning wasn't moral. It was functional. Fixed supply under rising demand creates deflationary spirals that punish circulation. And money that doesn't circulate isn't money. You can own Bitcoin. Just don't confuse holding it with using money. This connects directly to the deflation problem. Friedman's framework, money's second function, is unit of account. You need stable measurement to make rational economic calculations. If Bitcoin swings 15% in a week, and it does, you can't price contracts, plan investments, or negotiate wages in it. Every transaction becomes a speculative bet on short-term volatility. Here's the test Friedman would run. How many long-term contracts are denominated in Bitcoin? Mortgages? Salary agreements? Business loans? Effectively zero. Because nobody wants a 30-year obligation measured in something that might double or halve in 3 months. Even the crypto ecosystem doesn't price in Bitcoin. Exchanges quote altcoins in dollars or stablecoins. NFT prices are listed in dollars with BTC conversions. Transaction fees are confusing precisely because the dollar equivalent keeps changing. Compare that to what Friedman observed with actual money. The dollar's inflation is predictable enough. Even at 3 to 4% annually, that businesses plan around it. You can forecast costs, set prices, lock in contracts. Bitcoin's volatility makes that impossible. Crypto advocates respond. Volatility will decrease as adoption grows. Maybe, but Friedman would ask, what's the mechanism that gets you from here to there? If volatility prevents adoption, and adoption is required to reduce volatility, you're trapped in a chicken-egg problem. And the deflationary design, fixed supply, hoarding incentives, reinforces the volatility. Speculative demand surges create bubbles. Crashes follow. Repeat, this isn't unique to Bitcoin. Friedman saw the same pattern in gold. When used as money, its value instability caused economic chaos. The gold bugs loved it ideologically. The actual economy suffered. Bitcoin's volatility isn't a bug being fixed. It's a feature baked into the structure, and it disqualifies Bitcoin from functioning as a unit of account. Friedman understood network externalities long before the internet made them fashionable. Here's the mechanism. Money is more useful the more people accept it. That's not just convenient. It's the entire value proposition. If only 3 stores take Bitcoin, it's useless. If everyone takes dollars, you can operate seamlessly. This creates a coordination problem. Each individual has an incentive to stick with the dominant currency, even if an alternative might be theoretically superior. Friedman called this a tyranny of the status quo. Not because governments enforce it, though they do, but because users rationally prefer the currency everyone else uses. Bitcoin faces this head-on. Yes, it has passionate early adopters, but the global economy runs on dollars, euros, yen, currencies with massive installed bases, legal tender status, and institutional infrastructure. Switching costs are real. To adopt Bitcoin as your primary money, you need widespread merchant acceptance, stable purchasing power, easy conversion, tax accounting clarity, and regulatory certainty. None of those exist at scale. Friedman would predict, and we observe, that Bitcoin gets used where the incumbent system is weakest. Capital flight from authoritarian regimes, black market transactions, speculative trading. But for everyday commerce and stable economies, the network effects favor the entrenched currencies overwhelmingly. Crypto enthusiasts argue Bitcoin adoption is inevitable. Friedman's response would be, show me the mechanism that overcomes the coordination problem. Because history is full of better money that failed to displace the incumbent. Not due to quality, but due to network lock-in. Unless Bitcoin delivers something so overwhelmingly superior that it justifies the switching costs, the status quo wins by default. That's not pessimism. It's how network effects work. Here's where Friedman's public choice analysis becomes crucial. Friedman spent his career studying government behavior through incentives, not intentions. The question isn't whether officials should allow monetary competition. It's whether they will. His answer, no, because governments derive enormous power from controlling money. 3 mechanisms. First, seigniorage, the profit from printing money. Governments fund deficits by inflating. That's politically easier than raising taxes or cutting spending. Second, surveillance. Controlling the payment system enables monitoring economic activity, enforcing tax compliance, and tracking dissidents. Third, macroeconomic control. Central banks manipulate money supply to manage employment, inflation, and credit. Losing that lever threatens their entire policy toolkit. Bitcoin advocates treat this as irrelevant. Governments can't stop decentralized technology. Friedman would respond, they don't need to stop the technology. They just need to stop the on-ramps, off-ramps, and integration points. And we've seen exactly that. China banned crypto exchanges. The US requires KYC/AML compliance for on-ramps. Europe is pushing regulatory frameworks that treat crypto as taxable property, not currency. You can own Bitcoin, but try using it at scale without touching the regulated financial system. You'll hit barriers immediately. Friedman wasn't claiming governments are morally justified in monopolizing money. He was predicting they would defend that monopoly because their institutional survival depends on it. Bitcoin's decentralization makes seizure harder, but it doesn't make regulation impossible. Governments don't need to kill Bitcoin. They just need to contain it. And they're doing that methodically. This isn't a bug in government. It's the predictable behavior of institutions protecting their power. Friedman understood that. Crypto maximalists often don't. Friedman's 1999 prediction emphasized anonymity. Without a knowing B or B knowing A. Bitcoin's white paper promised pseudonymity, addresses instead of names. Early adopters treated this as privacy. But here's the mechanism Friedman would dissect. Blockchain transparency. Every Bitcoin transaction is recorded permanently on a public ledger. Once an address is linked to an identity, through an exchange, a purchase, an IP address, that entire transaction history becomes traceable. This isn't theoretical. Chain analysis firms specialize in de-anonymizing Bitcoin flows. Law enforcement uses this regularly. The anonymous digital cash vision collides with reality. Public ledgers are surveillance tools. Privacy coins like Monero attempt true anonymity. Governments respond by banning them or forcing exchanges to delist them. The crypto platforms that survive are the ones that comply with Know Your Customer regulations. Exactly what Friedman's vision required avoiding. Here's the contradiction. Bitcoin's decentralization depends on transparency. Everyone can verify the ledger, but transparency destroys privacy. You can't have a trustless public blockchain and transaction anonymity. Friedman would immediately spot this trade-off. Crypto advocates argue, use mixers, use Lightning, be careful. Fine, but that's not the seamless privacy Friedman envisioned. That's operational security theater for sophisticated few, while the majority leaves a permanent, traceable record of every transaction. Friedman's warning wasn't that privacy is impossible. It's that the mechanisms Bitcoin uses achieve transparency, not anonymity. And governments exploit that transparency ruthlessly. The irony, Bitcoin's most libertarian promise, freedom from surveillance, is undermined by its most celebrated feature, the immutable public ledger. Friedman often pointed out that theoretical decentralization and practical decentralization diverge. Bitcoin's protocol is decentralized, but operating on that protocol requires technical sophistication most users don't have. The mechanism, as systems grow complex, intermediaries emerge. You want to buy Bitcoin? You use Coinbase, a centralized exchange. You want to store it securely? You trust a custodial wallet service. You want to make transactions? You rely on nodes someone else runs. Friedman would recognize this pattern immediately. It's the same as banking. Yes, you can hold physical cash and settle transactions peer-to-peer. But in practice, people use intermediaries because they're easier, safer, and more efficient. Bitcoin's complexity, managing private keys, understanding transaction fees, verifying nodes, pushes users towards centralized services. Coinbase controls more Bitcoin than most sovereign wealth funds. A handful of mining pools control the majority of hash rate. This isn't a flaw in Bitcoin's users. It's a predictable response to technical barriers. Friedman's insight, Decentralization is costly. Most people rationally choose convenience over ideology. Crypto maximalists call this a temporary phase. Friedman would ask, what's the mechanism that reverses it? As Bitcoin scales, complexity increases. More complexity means more centralization pressure, not less. The evidence is clear. Bitcoin's ecosystem has more centralized choke points than it did in 2013, not fewer. Exchanges, custodians, mining pools, all concentrated. You can own decentralized money, but if you access it through centralized gatekeepers, the practical result is centralization with extra steps. Friedman would call that an ironic outcome, but an entirely predictable one. Friedman's test for money. Is it primarily used for transactions or primarily held for appreciation? Bitcoin's answer is obvious. It's an asset, not a currency. Here's the mechanism. When expected returns from holding exceed the utility of spending, rational actors hoard. Bitcoin's marketing reinforces this. Digital gold. Store of value. Hoard. The community celebrates not spending Bitcoin as a virtue. That's the opposite of money's function. Friedman observed the same pattern with gold. When people treated gold as an investment, it stopped circulating. Economies that relied on gold as money experienced liquidity crises, not because gold disappeared, but because people hoarded it. Bitcoin's price volatility makes this worse. If you bought Bitcoin at $60,000, you're waiting to break even. If you bought at $20,000, you're hoping for another rally. Either way, you're not spending it on groceries. Transaction data confirms this. Bitcoin's network processes approximately 300,000 transactions daily. Visa processes approximately 150 million. Most Bitcoin transactions are exchange-to-exchange movements or speculative trades, not payment for goods and services. Crypto enthusiasts respond, it's still early. Adoption takes time. Friedman would reply, adoption of what? If Bitcoin's value proposition is appreciation, you're not adopting a currency. You're buying an asset hoping someone will pay more later. That's speculation. And there's nothing wrong with speculation, but call it what it is. The warning isn't that Bitcoin can't be a successful speculative vehicle. It's that speculative dynamics disqualify it from being money. Friedman's distinction was sharp. Money circulates. Assets appreciate. The two functions conflict when the asset's expected return exceeds money's transaction utility. Bitcoin chose appreciation. That's fine, but it means the currency narrative is marketing, not mechanism. Friedman understood regulatory competition and its limits. Early Bitcoin adoption thrived in jurisdictions with weak oversight. Exchanges launched in Malta, Cayman Islands, Singapore. The pitch: operate beyond US or European reach. Friedman would predict temporary advantage, inevitable coordination. Here's why. Governments compete on some dimensions, attracting business, lowering taxes. But they cooperate on existential threats to their power. And monetary control is existential. We've seen this play out. The Financial Action Task Force issued global crypto standards. The U.S. pressured foreign exchanges to comply with reporting requirements. China banned crypto trading entirely. Europe drafted comprehensive regulations. The regulatory arbitrage window is closing, not because crypto failed, but because governments coordinated. Friedman's public choice framework explains this. When an innovation threatens state revenue or control, states cooperate to contain it. They don't need unanimity, just enough alignment to eliminate safe havens. Crypto advocates argue, decentralization makes enforcement impossible. Friedman's response: enforcement doesn't require perfection. Just raise the cost of non-compliance high enough that most rational actors comply. You can still use Bitcoin anonymously, but accessing the on-ramps, exchanges, payment processors, merchant integrations now requires identity verification, tax reporting, and regulatory compliance. That's not total defeat, but it's not the borderless, regulation-free vision either. Friedman's warning: arbitrage opportunities are profitable because they're temporary. Once governments recognize the threat, They close the gaps, and crypto's gaps are closing faster than new ones open. This doesn't kill Bitcoin. It just forces it to operate within the system it claimed to escape. Friedman's final structural insight: all money requires trust. Bitcoin's pitch: don't trust institutions, trust math. Friedman would respond: you're still trusting, just different things. You're trusting the cryptographic algorithms haven't been broken. The majority of hash power remains honest. The developers maintaining the protocol act competently. The exchanges holding your coins won't get hacked or collapse. And the regulatory environment won't destroy your ability to convert BTC to usable currency. That's a lot of trust, just distributed differently. Friedman wasn't dismissing algorithmic trust. He was pointing out that trustless is a misnomer. You replace trust in central banks with trust in code, miners, and infrastructure, which is more reliable. Institutions can be corrupt, but they're also accountable, legally constrained, and have reputational incentives. Central banks make mistakes. Friedman documented those exhaustively, but they operate under political and legal oversight. Code can be elegant, but it can also have bugs, exploits, and unintended consequences. And code doesn't care if you lose your private key or send funds to the wrong address. Friedman's pragmatism: evaluate trust mechanisms by outcomes, not aesthetics. Central banking has flaws, but hyperinflation is rare, and modern monetary systems have mostly avoided Great Depression-scale collapses. Bitcoin has promise, but it's also experienced exchange collapses, Mt. Gox, FTX, protocol vulnerabilities, and catastrophic user errors. The warning isn't that institutions are perfect. It's that algorithmic trust isn't inherently superior. It just shifts risk elsewhere. Friedman would ask, which system delivers stable, usable money? So far, institutions win. Not because they're morally better, because they're structurally more adaptable and socially embedded. That could change, but it hasn't yet. So where does this leave us? Friedman didn't predict Bitcoin, but he analyzed the mechanisms any private money confronts, and every one of his warnings has proven relevant. Fixed supply creates deflationary hoarding incentives. Bitcoin isn't circulating as money. It's held as an asset. Volatility destroys unit of account function. Nobody prices in Bitcoin because nobody knows what it'll be worth next week. Network effects favor incumbents. Dollars dominate because everyone uses dollars. Switching costs remain prohibitive. Governments defend their monopoly. Regulatory frameworks are tightening globally. Bitcoin survives, but within constraints that limit its revolutionary potential. Privacy promises failed. Blockchain transparency enables surveillance more than it prevents it. Complexity drives centralization. Most users rely on intermediaries, recreating the very structures Bitcoin claimed to eliminate. Speculation overwhelms monetary use. Bitcoin functions as a speculative asset, not a medium of exchange. Regulatory arbitrage is closing. Jurisdictional loopholes are narrowing as governments coordinate. Trust still matters. You're trusting code and infrastructure, not eliminating trust. Does this mean Bitcoin is worthless? No. It means Bitcoin isn't what it's marketed as. It's a speculative asset with some useful properties. Cross-border transfer, inflation hedge maybe, censorship resistance in limited contexts. But it's not replacing dollars. It's not sound money if nobody uses it as money. It's not freedom from institutions if you access it through regulated exchanges. Friedman would say, fine, own it if you want. Just don't confuse the narrative with the mechanism. Here's the reusable framework. For anything claiming to be money, ask, do people use it for transactions or hold it for appreciation? Can you price long-term contract in it? Does it circulate or does it hoard? What trust mechanisms does it require? How do governments respond to it? Run Bitcoin through those questions. The answers are clear. That doesn't make Bitcoin a scam. It makes it a different thing than advertised. And recognizing that difference is what separates analysis from ideology. Milton Friedman didn't need to see Bitcoin's code to understand its challenges. He'd analyzed the structural requirements for money to function. He'd studied why private currencies fail, why governments monopolize money creation, and why theoretical advantages collapse under real-world constraints. Every warning he identified before Bitcoin existed has materialized not because he had mystical foresight, because mechanisms are predictable. Incentives don't change. Coordination problems persist. Governments defend power. Complexity creates friction. You can still own Bitcoin. You can believe it has value. But if you're evaluating it as money, run it through Friedman's framework, not through marketing, not through ideology. Ask, does it circulate? Does it measure value? Does it store purchasing power predictably? The answer determines whether you're using money or hoping an asset appreciates. Friedman's legacy isn't opposition to innovation. It's insistence on clarity. Call Bitcoin what it is. Analyze it for what it does. And stop confusing speculation with monetary revolution, because mechanisms matter more than narratives, and reality has a way of asserting itself, regardless of how elegant the white paper sounds. That's the standard we use here. Trade-offs over talking points. Evidence over enthusiasm. If that's how you evaluate ideas, you're in the right place.